Day 565. Today there are a lot of important developments. As Ukrainians pass the second line of defense and get closer and closer to Tokmak every day, the southern front becomes almost the sole concern of the Russian high command, which is why they have already started to slowly relocate additional forces from all other fronts. As you remember, previously Russian forces even planned to undermine Ukrainian offensive efforts by launching their own offensive in the Luhansk region, hoping to generate a breakthrough that would force Ukrainians to disperse their troops and cancel the counteroffensive. However, after all their attempts had failed and the situation on the southern front became even worse, Russians found themselves in a position where they had to cancel their own plans and urgently reinforce the southern line. Amid such changes, the Ukrainian command noticed that some regions became severely understaffed. Ukrainians concluded that Russians essentially drained their reserves on the eastern front and left certain areas in an extremely vulnerable position. One such vulnerable area turned out to be the southern Avdiivka's flank, and Ukrainians immediately exploited it. The main direction of Ukrainian advancement became Opatne, where Russian forces had established a small bridgehead and were planning to start storming the residential area of Avdiivka. As Ukrainians continued assaulting one tree line after another, the Russian defense started to gradually give in, and Ukrainians advanced by up to 800 meters. Russian sources started raising the alarm about the situation around Opatne and calling for urgent reinforcements. However, the front line collapsed before the Russians took any measures whatsoever, because Russian forces made a grave mistake. As it turned out, Russian forces received an order to conduct a gradual and organized retreat from their positions closer toward Opatne. But due to the low morale of the soldiers, the moment they finally heard the word retreat, they did not bother to organize it and started abandoning their positions en masse. The Russian drone operators noticed up to 200 troops moving towards Opatne and thought that this was a massive Ukrainian attack, which is why they called for artillery support, and the artillery started shelling the fields in front of Opatne with vicious intensity. Several hours ago, Russian sources stated that there was a horrible accident where Russian artillery killed and wounded at least 61 Russian soldiers due to the lack of coordination. Ukrainians obviously exploited this opportunity to the fullest, and after Russians killed their own troops that defended Opatne, Ukrainians managed to defeat the remnants of the Russian forces, advancing by up to 1.5 additional kilometers. Soon Ukrainian officials confirmed that the elements of the 53rd and 501st Brigades entered the village of Opatne. The clashes inside the village still continue, because Russians understand that if they leave it, then returning control over it would be virtually impossible. As you can see, the village is basically cut off from the Russian side by a river, which means that Russians would have a very limited set of options for how to attack it. Russian sources reported that Russian forces reinforced this region with the 1st Slavic Brigade, and that their forces are already conducting counterattacks north of the village. However, other sources still say that it was too late, and Russians are just conducting a controlled retreat from the village. Recently, Ukrainians also conducted a successful counterattack a little bit west of Opatne. As confirmed by the geolocated footage, Ukrainians have advanced by up to half a kilometer toward Pisky. The footage shows how Russians bombed the northern part of the village, which confirms that it is under Ukrainian control. Ukrainian fighters from this direction also released combat footage and showed how they are already attacking a Russian position in Pisky. The third axis of Ukrainian advancement is from Nevelsk. Recently released geolocated footage shows how Ukrainians conducted a successful assault on Russian positions in front of the village. The assault group suppressed Russian fire, gradually approached the trenches and then cleared them. Judging by the actions of the Ukrainian forces, Ukrainians are trying to completely slice off the Russian bridgehead south of Avdiivka. And this is extremely important because if Russian forces advance by several kilometers north of Vodyane, then Ukrainians in Avdiivka will appear in operational encirclement. Slicing it off will annihilate more than a year of Russian effort and significantly simplify the defensive operation in and around Avdiivka. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky recently visited the front line in Avdiivka and had a personal meeting with each and every brigade that is operating in the region. With the fighters from the 109th Territorial Brigade, the Titans from the famous 110th Mechanized Brigade, the Marines from the 36th Brigade, the fighters from the 59th Motorized Brigade, the fighters from the 53rd Mechanized Brigade who were responsible for the massive breakthrough near Opatne, the fighters from the 79th Air Assault Brigade, and the Marines from the 37th and 38th Brigades. In order to do this, the president visited multiple checkpoints along the Donetsk front. The president made sure to hear the current challenges and needs of all forces for himself, and not from bureaucratic reports that tend to distort the real picture and hide the problems. This way, the president is in a better position to monitor how Ukrainian forces are being supplied and personally make sure that everything that can be done to facilitate the Ukrainian advancement will be done. If you're against the invasion of Ukraine and you want to support the work that I am doing,